the idea that they want to maintain their reputations, it's laughable, right? It's absolutely laughable, and it's just simply not a thing. That is like, even when it comes down to like some place has a giant freaking accident, right? What do they focus on? They don't focus on, let's take for example, we had this train crash in Ohio, right? Which is still very much in the news now. This happened about a week ago or so. Actually, no, it was February 3rd, so about 20 days, so a little more than 2 weeks, right? Sure, you guys heard about this massively huge train crash outside of East Palestine, Ohio, right? And it was a train run by a company called Norfolk Southern, right? That was transporting hazardous materials, hazardous chemicals, across, in the rail lines, right? And roughly 38 cars derailed and a fire ensued. So, something interesting that you guys may like to know about. They have successfully lobbied, because they're not supposed to have train cars that are that huge, right? And the rail companies have continuously lobbied over the years to where now it's legal to have train cars like up to like 150 cars, right, on one train, right? And they've lobbied it down to where, they've gotten the regulations changed, right, through basically donating to, various politicians and things like that. And they've gotten it changed all the way down to so that they only have 2 people running that entire train. So 2 people on a huge-ass train with 150 cars on it. I'm assuming one guy in the front, one guy in the back, maybe. Right? They have cut it so that, they're supposed to inspect each car, periodically. They're supposed to, go to whatever station that they go to and inspect each car, make sure it's not on fire, for example, stuff like that. They've got that down to 60 seconds per car. So they don't even stop and give it 4 or 5 minutes per car to look, look inside, make sure nothing's burning, nothing like that, right? 60 seconds. So can you effectively, make sure everything's safe on a train car in 60 seconds? I mean, I don't know, can you? Kind of sounds like you can't to me. Kind of sounds a little unrealistic to me, right? So that's, it's no wonder that these sorts of train derailments happen all the time. And apparently they do. I didn't know this. This was all news to me. I had no clue. But apparently these sort of toxic spills from train accidents, trains carrying toxic chemicals, stuff like that. Apparently this is a thing that happens constantly. And, right after this derailment story happened in Ohio, for a couple of days, the news was hot on that, and they started reporting on it. So, oh, here's another one. Here's a factory fire in here's another train derailment in Michigan, right? And then here's a factory fire in Florida and all this other stuff. They started reporting on these things, right? And it's like, well, how come so many happened in such a small amount of time? It's because they happen all the time, all over the country, right? Who knew? And we just don't really hear about it because it's such a common thing. It's almost like school shootings. You hear about a school shooting now, and it's in the news for a day. And it's like, oh, a school in Minnesota, 17 people were murdered or whatever. And then the next day, that's it. You never hear about it ever again. And it's like, everybody gets all, oh no, thoughts and prayers, blah, blah, blah. No, we got to do something, gun control, whatever. And then it's gone. And then that's it. You never hear anything about the school shooting again. Can you even name the last one that happened? Right? Like, I can't. I think there was one 2 days ago, if I remember, in the news, but who knows? There's probably been another one since then, right? Apparently it's the same deal when it comes to these train crash things. There's just so many, Why the hell are there so many? Well, there's lots of different reasons, you know. But it's mainly because we're not enforcing regulations. So a little bit more about this crash in Ohio. These 38 cars had about 5 or so that were carrying pretty gnarly chemicals. The most prevalent being vinyl chloride, right? Vinyl chloride is used to make plastic and can cause a very, very rare form of liver cancer. So that's, that's no bueno. Another one was ethahexyl acrylate, which is used to make adhesives, things like rubber cement, stuff like that. It's also carcinogenic. And then the last was ethylene glycol, which is used in antifreeze, brake fluid, paints, plastic, ballpoint pens. This can be toxic if you get a large enough dose. Apparently you have to breathe in a lot of it, or, ingest a lot of it in order for it to be toxic, but still not good. It's stuff you don't want floating around in the environment, right? So here's what happened. Roughly around 9 p.m. local time, this train shows up and derails, right? Although there's video from several hours earlier where the train car was already on fire for like a while. I mean, hey, maybe if they didn't have so many damn train cars on the train, somebody would have noticed it, Maybe if there weren't 150 damn cars on the train, right, the guy could have looked through the mirror and seen it. Maybe if they would have had more than 2 guys running the damn train, maybe if they had like a crew of people like they're supposed to, like they used to back in the olden days, then maybe somebody would have noticed it was on fire. I don't know, that just seems logical to me. Anyway, so it derails by this town, right, and starts spilling all this toxic crap into the air. So apparently vinyl chloride, when it's exposed to the air, will evaporate rather quickly. So it's not that big of a problem. However, it's more of a problem when it's leaks into the soil and water. Then it can persist for long periods of time. So, but what they were afraid of is they were afraid that this was going to explode and kill a lot of people and cause a giant fire, right? So they decided to kind of vent some of these cars, right? So they empty out some of the cars into a ditch that was along the side of the road, so that way it wouldn't explode. But then they were afraid of this ditch catching on fire and the same shit happening. This is when it was when all these chemicals were basically introduced into the environment. So remember, they spilled them on purpose because they didn't want the cars to blow up and kill people. So then it starts leaching into the groundwater and stuff. So they go, okay, we got to get rid of it. So instead of cleaning it up, what they decided to do was burn it all off. And apparently that would be the lesser of the two evils, rather than risking it catching on fire and blowing up and killing a bunch of people, or waiting to have it waiting around so that it contaminates the local streams and rivers even more. They decide to burn it, and that's where you got this giant photo that everybody has seen of these this huge toxic cloud, right? So I got the picture here. I'm sure you've all seen this picture of this giant mushroom cloud. Kind of looks like a nuclear bomb went off, right? So while all this shit is happening, they're telling people to stay home. Stay home, shelter in place, don't go outside. It's cool, you're safe, whatever, right? Then they evacuate people when they decide to burn it all off. Then they go, okay, everybody evacuate. And apparently it was pretty tough. Apparently they were telling people, you will evacuate. Because there's always people, whenever a disaster comes, there's always people that are fucking stupid and decide to not, leave, there'd be a flood or whatever, and they're like, this place has flooded 50 times, I ain't leaving my house, You always get people like that. And apparently they were, you will evacuate. We mean it. If you don't leave, we're going to arrest you for like child endangerment. Like apparently it was that bad. They're like everybody get the F out, right? So people left. Then 5 days later, they went and tested everything and said, okay, come on back. And people were like, well, wait a minute. Like, why was it so bad that you told us to evacuate? And now you're saying everything's cool, right? And understandably, many people are just not buying it, right? So, let me see, where were we? Okay. So people come back because the Environmental Protection Agency said that it was cool and that they can come back to live at their houses and stuff, right? And hang on, I lost something here. Give me a second. I got too many windows open. Okay. And people start getting rashes. People start, coughing. It still smells like, metal, like burnt metal or like antifreeze or whatever, right? People get in trouble breathing. Their cats and dogs are ended up dropping dead. They're seeing dead birds all over the place. Local wildlife is decimated. There's all these videos of fish floating up dead, and people are saying stuff like, oh, I had squirrels running around in my backyard and they're all gone now. All the birds are gone. We're not hearing insects anymore at night. That kind of thing. Because it's a pretty rural area, this place, apparently. Right. And, there's even people that are saying, like, they're coughing up blood. Like, I saw an interview of a guy saying that I came home, I took a shower, and I got this huge rash all over me, and then I drank some coffee, and apparently these chemicals have leached into the groundwater because now this dude is coughing up blood, after drinking some coffee, right? So, yeah, people are not buying it when the Environmental Protection Agency is telling them that it's all safe and sound and that they're monitoring the air and everything and it's at an acceptable level and you may have some side effects for a little while, but it's perfectly safe and you can breathe, and people are just not going for it at all, right? And can you blame them? Because we live in a country, that has a history of this kind of thing, that whenever there is a huge environmental disaster like this, it gets ignored. They sweep it under the rug. Think Aaron Brockovich, for example. There's a whole movie about that. If you've never seen Aaron Brockovich, go watch it. It's about a situation like this where, I don't know the story exactly off the top of my head, but it's got something. It's like a company that, fucking covers up like cancer and stuff like that. Like, it's pretty interesting stuff, right? Go watch it. I'm not prepared to talk about, like, I can't remember the exact plot, but that kind of thing. Aaron Brockovich is actually like a true story, like this lawyer that uncovered this company that was covering up like this, because they were liable for giving a bunch of people cancer. Crazy shit. And it's a good movie that came out with I think it was Julia Roberts in the 80s. So anyway, this kind of thing has happened in the past before, where a corporation or a company or whatever will just straight up lie. I mean, also think about things like cigarettes, for example. Cigarette companies knew way back in the 50s, they figured out that through tests on their own that their product was giving people cancer, and they covered it up. They covered it up for, years, and people were smoking and dropping like flies, and nobody knew why until it finally, it finally came out. And then tobacco companies took another, fought for years and years and years to deny it, and then they came up with phony scientists and all this other baloney, our shit doesn't cause cancer, whatever, that kind of thing, in order to... And here's the reason why. Why do companies like this fight tooth and nail whenever something like this happens? Because apparently, right, this company here, what the hell were they called again? This Norfolk Southern, right? Apparently, they went and offered the entire town roughly $2,500, right? And now, which is like a town of 5,000 people. So yeah, everybody gets $5, right? That was what they fucking offered. So it's like, yeah, please don't sue us. Here's $5. Like, yeah, man, maybe I can go to the movies by myself. Right? Thanks for the $5. But, you know, now they're going around and they're offering money to the residents there, saying, please accept this money. Please don't. And if you take this money, then that means you can't sue us, right? Because they know they're liable. And if it gets out that if one person sues them and it's successful, then it's going to turn into this chain reaction of people suing. And then they're going to have, like, you know, they're going to have class action suits and all that. So now they're trying to buy everybody off because they don't want to admit liability, right? And it's already happening. There's already lawsuits that are getting filed. You know, they're going to be fighting this off for years and years, but it is, you know, in their best interest to do so, because companies like this, like you know, like this that do these risky sort of polluting, you know, actions. They did a calculation. Okay, Norfolk Southern, they've definitely, you know, and don't think they haven't. They've done a calculation where they said, okay, the risk of an accident such as this is this much, and if it happens, we'll be liable. We'll have to pay X amount of money. And they've done these and they've come to the conclusion that the risk is acceptable, and that's why they decided to overload that train. That's why they decided, okay, we're not going to spend the money it would take to update the braking system or something like that, you know, or we're not going to hire additional staff on the train, or we're not going to, you know. And they factored all that in and said, yeah, we'll still make this much money even if there is a disaster and we end up paying out $100 million or something. Doesn't matter. We'll still come out ahead. I didn't know this, but the rail industry in the United States is ridiculously profitable. Did any of you guys have any idea about this? It's a surprise to me because, you know, like, for example, they were saying during this whole, like, railroad strike that happened last month. You remember the railroad strike thing? Like, was it last month? It might have been a few months ago. You know, they were saying how they're, like, on the verge of bankruptcy, and they can't afford to give their workers, you know, an extra paid sick time of any sort. Remember, the railroad workers don't have any paid sick time at all. Like, yeah, we can't afford to give them. We're like on the verge of bankruptcy and all this other shit. And then you find out, well, no, they're not. The rail industry last year made about $12 billion in profits. Just straight up profit, right? $12 billion. That's like ridiculous. That's incredibly profitable. That's like oil company fucking profits right there. Like, comparable to that shit. So how come they're making so much damn money, right? It's because they've calculated, you know, what the risks are, and they're pushing it as soon as possible. You got to remember, right, that, you know, to a corporation is not there to help you, right? They're not there to provide a service. They're not there to provide you know, a good or a service. Like, for example, the airline companies, don't exist to fly airplanes and get you from point A to point B. They don't, right? They exist to make money, right? Any company out there, any corporation, any type of, you know, they're all money-making ventures, as what they are. And, you know, for example, the railroad company, you know, if they could make money not running any trains at all, they would do it, right? Who the hell wants to, like, run trains? That shit's expensive, right? If, you know, the same thing with, like, the airline companies, right? If they could make money not flying any airplanes, right, at all, that's what they would do, right? So it's not there. They're not there to help you, right? They're there to make money for themselves, to make profit for their shareholders, right? And for their executives and their CEOs. And the way they do that is by bringing in more revenue than their costs. And it's just like with anything, you know, this is capitalism, right? That's how capitalism works. You know, you make more money than you spend and you come out ahead. Easy stuff to understand, right? Well, the number one cost that you can control is wages, right? That's why whenever, a company's doing bad, first thing they do is lay people off, right? Why? Because your wages are your biggest expense, 9 times out of 10. You can always see it. They'll start anytime a company's in trouble, right? And revenue's down or whatever, right? And even it might even be like, the revenue is down, but they're still in the red, or they're still in the black. They're still making money. They're just not making as much as they used to, right? Well, that's not good enough. See, the whole point of late stage capitalism is that there has to be endless growth. You can't just sustain where you're at, because then you don't go anywhere. It has to continue growing for the the CEO at the top has to buy another goddamn mansion, right? In order to keep, that's what it's like. I'm just being realistic. This is the world we live in, I'm not making judgments one way or the other. I'm not saying it's bad or it's good or whatever. This is just reality. So, what's the first thing they do whenever a company starts losing money, right? They start cutting things they consider unnecessary, i.e. they start cutting people. Because that's the first way you save money, You get rid of your biggest expense is wages. Get rid of the people that you don't need anymore, or that you don't think you need, which is always bad. You can always tell when a company's going to end up folding up shop is when they start cutting the wrong people, Twitter, for example, we needed all those developers and stuff like that, right? We needed all those developers. Oh, now our site's a fucking ridiculous, buggy piece of crap that barely works. Oh, yeah, well, maybe you shouldn't have laid off everybody that actually kept the lights on. Elon Musk is a goddamn idiot. Anyway, getting back to the subject at hand here. So now people are at home. They're, pretty much screwed. They've been exposed to deadly carcinogenic chemicals, and we will not know the result of this for years to come, right? And what would you say, if you were a... excuse me. Actually, I do have a couple things I want to show you guys here. So we were talking about things like fish, stuff like that. This is a video that I saw here on Reddit. Let me just go ahead and move this over into my thing here. Give me 1 second. Okay. And let's make this full-sized. Nope, stop. Rewind that. So just to kind of show you exactly what's going on here, here's a video that I caught from Reddit. And you can see here's a lady that lives there. She's throwing a brick into the stream, and once the water churns up, you can see this sort of chemical slick that pops up from the bottom there. So, and this apparently is what's going on there in all the different streams and stuff, right? That the EPA is saying is safe. Fun fact, the EPA actually didn't do the testing themselves for the air and the water. They hired an outside firm. They actually relied on Norfolk Southern to hire a firm to do the testing for them, right? So Norfolk Southern goes out, hires some people, and lo and behold, the people they hire says that it's all safe. Gee, I wonder why. It's kind of like having the fox run the hen house. I mean, do you think that Norfolk Southern would go and hire a company that would tell them that it's not safe? Do you think that would be a thing? Don't you think that if they were to actually do that and find a company that told them it wasn't safe, then they would go hire a different one until they found one that said that it was safe, right? Because here's the thing, folks, right? You can't rely on an industry to police itself. Anyway, you get the idea. You see the weird chemical shit all over the top of the water here. Right. Very bad news. So let's go ahead and turn that off for now. Go ahead and turn that off. There we go. I did want to show you one other thing here. Here is the railroad tracks in Ohio. Let's see. Something went wrong loading the video. Oh, come on, man. Don't do this to me. Load, please. There we go. Okay. Video cannot be played. No. Oh, well, anyway, damn it. I had this video. I guess they must have took it down. Of these railroad tracks in. Okay, here we go. Here's another one. Let's try this one. There it is. Okay. And let's make this bigger. And let's stop that. Okay, so this is what I wanted to show you guys. So these are the railroad tracks in Ohio. So you see these tracks here? See how they're all weird and noodly and like rough? See all that? Train tracks are supposed to be straight, right? Look at this thing. Okay, first off, look how slow the train has to go in order to get by all of this, right? It's got to slow down to 5 miles an hour, right? So that's, I mean, I thought these companies wanted to make money, you would think that they want their trains to go through fast, right? Like, look how it's slowing to a crawl, and it has to in order to keep itself from, to keep the train from flying off the tracks like that, right? Now, when I first saw this video, I thought this was like maybe Eastern Europe or something. Like, I thought this may have been like a former Soviet republic, like, like fucking Turkmenistan or like fucking, something like that. Or maybe this was like Slovakia, or even like maybe a country in Africa or something. That's what like this is the kind of thing you usually see in third world countries, is what I'm talking about. And no, this is the United States. This is Ohio, right? I mean, and who knows if Ohio's the only one. It's probably like this all over the place. See the track here? See how this is like going up and down right here? It's not supposed to be doing that, right? Train tracks are supposed to be like bolted to the ground, so that the train can go over them quickly, right? Because that's the whole point of having a damn train, is so that your tracks could, they're not supposed to fly up like this. And is it any wonder that it fell off in the first place, right? Why are the train tracks like that? Why did this happen? Because these tracks are privately owned. I went and took a look, and it looks like about a third of the tracks in Ohio are actually maintained by the government, the state government of Ohio, and the rest are privately owned. And I couldn't find out if the ones that that this particular accident happened on, if they were privately owned or if they were maintained by the state or maintained by the company. But at this point it doesn't matter, because I can guarantee you there are regulations out there that says, hey, these tracks need to be updated every X number of years. I can guarantee you, I can go through and I could find, somewhere in Ohio law or somewhere in federal law, somewhere that says that these things should not be like that, right? And 9 times out of 10, why is it not being, why is it not being followed, the regulation, right? Because politics. Because somebody got elected somewhere, which either, either is not enforcing the regulation or has repealed it, right? Because Republicans don't like regulations, because Republicans don't like governing. Republicans only really like, get elected themselves in order to cut everything so that they can cut taxes for themselves and their rich criminal friends, and that's really it. That's what all Republicans care about, is spending as little taxes as possible, and enforcing regulations costs money, and it doesn't, and it hurts business, right? And they're more interested in making money than protecting people. That's really all it comes down to. And that's the whole reason why conservatives and Republicans and libertarians and things, that's why they hate taxes, right? So much. That's why they always want to shrink government. You ever hear them talking about, like, conservatives and shit? We want to shrink government down to the size of a baby, and that way we can drown it in a bathtub. You know, you always hear that kind of thing, right? Why? Because it's a barrier in order for them to make money. And they want to make as much money as possible. They want to spend as little of it as they can on government stuff, which includes regulations. And as a result of that, people end up dying. People end up getting cancer. People end up, you know, getting exposed to toxic chemicals. And who knows how bad it's going to be in 5, 10, 20 years from now. Right? And good luck ever proving that it actually came from this spill either. See, here's the thing, right? We touched a little bit on this earlier in the stream. So you would say, okay, the second reason, right? So the first thing, you know, if you're talking about like the conservative libertarian approach to regulations, right? And we mentioned, okay, the desire of a company to keep its reputation, right? That obviously isn't good enough. Right, so the second response you'll get from your libertarian friend out there is that he'll say, okay, well, you know, in addition to wanting to keep their reputations, you know, unsullied, the average consumer can just use the court system in order to enforce regulations themselves. And it goes like this. If you say, for example, have a building company, you know, and you build a building and then it falls down during an earthquake, then the person who bought the building just simply sues the company, sues the contractor or the construction company or whatever through the courts and is able to, you know, and then gets a monetary reward, and that will, you know, so the threat of lawsuits will prevent companies from cheaping out and not building their buildings up to code. And that is why that we can just, you know, we don't need to have regulations because everybody can just use the court and enforce it themselves. Which is, again, 100% complete grade A bullshit. It's unrealistic for this reason. If not for any other reason, but for this reason, right? Is that in a perfect world where everyone was equal economically, you could make that argument. But people are not equal economically, especially when it comes to the average Joe who owns a house in, say, East Palestine, where this, for example, using this example of this train derailment, right? The average Joe that lives in East Palestine does not have the millions upon millions of dollars that Norfolk Southern has, right? Norfolk Southern makes, you know, however much money it is a year. I mean, like we said, it was a $12 billion a year industry. They're making a healthy chunk of that, right? They've got all the money in the world it takes to hire lawyers and to keep this all tied up in the court for years and years and years. So your average person cannot hire a lawyer for years and years and years. They'll be lucky to get anything if they do sue. If they do decide to sue, they'll be lucky if they even win anything, they'll be lucky, right? And in the meantime, Norfolk Southern will just keep dragging it on and on and on because they can afford to pay their lawyers for it. And it's in their best interest to not settle, you know, to not pay, because then that means they're liable. So even if they end up losing money, they'll just keep it, you know, going forever and ever and ever in the courts until the person trying to sue finally drops out because they can't afford it anymore, right? And besides that, all the government officials and things are pretty much bought off by them anyway, so good luck. And the regulations are on their side to begin with because they just bribed their way into, you know, getting the people elected that will decide in their favor, right? So it's simply not a viable solution. It's fine if you are rich and super powerful and you can afford to pay a lawyer for fucking 20 years, right? But for everybody else, that's just not, it's not a sufficient pressure in order to make a company actually follow regulations, in order to make a company not cheap out and make everything safe, right? You know, especially when doing so costs them money. It's like, no, they factor these things in, you know. Guaranteed, Norfolk Southern has a guy that went through and said the estimated cost of lawsuits due to accidents is this much, and they made a decision saying, well, even if we do get sued by 20 people, and we do have to pay them all $1 million each, we'll still come out ahead, right? Because they're making hundreds of millions of dollars a year, so 20 million bucks in lawsuits is small potatoes to them, and they're still going to continue doing business the way they're doing business, right? So that's the first reason why it doesn't work. Second reason why it's a not acceptable solution, besides the fact that it just doesn't straight up just doesn't work, is that somebody has to actually be injured before you can sue them. So there has to be an accident, right, in order for people to sue, right? Well, that's fine when it's just like some damage to your property or whatever, you know. But this is people's lives we're talking about. These people have been exposed to, you know, cancer-causing chemicals, which may take a dozen years or more to actually manifest. So, you know, 10, 20, 30 years from now, they show up and 500 people in this area have cancer. Right? And it's pretty freaking obvious where it comes from. Well, why do we have to wait until people come down with cancer first before we force a company to follow regulations? Using the earthquake example in Turkey, you know, why does, you know, let's say, for example, you buy a house, using that example, right, the earthquake. You buy a house, right, everything's cool. 30 years later, there's an earthquake. Your house falls down, right? First off, you may die. Secondly, if you didn't die, who are you supposed to sue? You know, the person that ran the company, it's 30 years later. That person may be dead by now, right? You don't even know if they're still alive. You don't even know if the corporation that built your house, the company, the contractors that built your house are even still around, if they're even still in business, right? And then how are you supposed to find that out? What if somebody bought them? Like, you know, what if the guy that built your house, you know, sold his company to somebody else and then they dissolved it, right? Are they liable for it? Maybe. Who even knows the way the law is written? Maybe not. You might not even be able to track down that company at all. It may not even exist anymore. They may have gone out of business, and then you're what? You're completely shit out of luck in that case, right? And then, you know, you had to, so you don't even find out until years later, and then you have no recourse. If we leave it up to the conservative libertarian model, there may not even be someone that you can sue, right? Let alone the fact that, you know, your friends or your family may have died in the earthquake. So now someone's, you know, why wait until someone's dead before we do something about it? The whole point of regulations is supposed to protect people so that people don't die, right? That's the whole idea. You know, you inspect the beef at your meatpacking plant so that it doesn't go out and people don't eat it and then die, right? You inspect the food at your restaurant before the people eat it, not afterwards, right? So that they don't get food poisoning, they don't get salmonella and die, right? You inspect the trains, and you have regulations saying, you know, trains with hazardous chemicals are only supposed to go this fast. They're supposed to have modern air brakes, or not air brakes, but electronic brakes, things like that. You do that before the accident, because that way it has a chance of actually preventing the accident in the first place, so that people don't die, right? I use that example because that's a real life example. During the Obama administration, Obama tried to enact a regulation that said, hey, trains with these certain dangerous chemicals have to have modern electronic brakes, right? What were they called? The brakes were ECP brakes, electronically controlled pneumatic brakes, right? Because currently, these huge trains are using air brakes, which were invented during the Civil War. I'm sure you've all heard this, people talking about this on the news, the Civil War era brakes. They're not the exact same machinery that was put in place during the Civil War, no, but they are an invention that was created during the Civil War. And the way air brakes work is that each train has to stop one at a time, which is highly inefficient and can lead to derailments, right? Instead of electronic controlled pneumatic brakes, which stop all of them at the same time. A lot less, risk of derailment there, right? Yeah, he tried to pass that. And then in 2017, Trump reversed it. In fact, we actually have here an image. Let's go down here. This here is an image of Donald Trump. Donald Trump. Anyway, Donald Trump bragging about reversing this particular regulation. The Trump administration has terminated more unnecessary regulation in just 12 months than any other administration has terminated during their full term in office. No matter what the length, the good news is there's much more to come. Just want to throw that out there. It's like, maybe if we would have took these things seriously, maybe that accident could have been avoided and we wouldn't have 5,000 people at risk of catching cancer now, right? So, one last thing I want to talk about before we end, because we're getting close to the 2-hour mark here, is the reaction of the right wing in this. Because, okay, so we've seen the Democrats are not doing that good of a job. Okay, and they're not. You got Pete Buttigieg just didn't actually say anything, right, for like 10 days after this. Seemingly completely ignored it, and then he finally tweeted something, right? So, yeah, instead of using this opportunity to actually, regulate the rail industry, Democrats, in the Biden administration are seemingly dropping the ball. They're not regulating shit, right? And it's because you got to remember that, the reason why, of course, is because Joe Biden is a corporate stooge, I don't think anybody out there, even the people who voted for him, are surprised by the fact that he's not, a big fan of regulations, I mean, he even broke a rail strike not that long ago, if you guys remember. He's very pro-big business, right? He's not a progressive by any stretch of the imagination. That doesn't mean that he's a bad president, right? I personally think Joe Biden's done way better than I would ever have thought as president. He's done some good things, things like the forgiveness for for marijuana, for example, stuff like that, right? He's not he's not the crappiest president ever, but definitely not a progressive. Not a progressive, leaves a lot to be desired in this particular area. Imagine if Bernie Sanders was president right now. He'd be out there, he'd be forcing the transportation secretary to actually regulate these people. He'd be making Pete Buttigieg actually do his damn job, like he should be, right? And that he doesn't seem to be doing, So, yeah, just to remember, I mean, even though, I voted for Biden, I'll probably vote for him again. If it comes up, if it's Trump versus Biden again, I'm voting Biden again, right? But that doesn't mean just because you vote for somebody, just because you support somebody, doesn't mean you make excuses for them. And he definitely does not deserve to have any excuses made in this instance. You know, we know the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to actually hold these companies accountable. Biden doesn't seem to be doing that. Something to remember is that the Republicans would not do any better in this situation at all. They would actually be doing way worse, in my opinion, right? Republicans do not care about regulations whatsoever. They wouldn't do it, like, they wouldn't do anything to solve this, right? And you can see it in pretty much every pundit and politician that talks about this from the right wing, from the Republican Party, is they skirt around the issue, and they're perfectly happy blaming Biden and the Democrats and making fun of Pete Buttigieg and all that stuff. But when it comes to actual solutions, they don't have any, because the solution involves regulating the rail companies, and they don't want to do that. They don't want to regulate the rail companies, right? They refuse to do that. So they have no actual substance. If you look at somebody like Tucker Carlson talk about this, or Sean Hannity, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, or anybody, and all of them, get on the radio, they get on the airwaves, and they talk a bunch of shit, and they say, oh, isn't this a disaster? We could have done better. None of them offer any solutions at all, because there is only one solution. The solution we have is you need to pass tougher regulations, and you need to enforce those regulations. They don't want to do that because they don't believe in regulations. So don't believe them for half a second. They would not make this any. They don't have anything, right? They don't have solutions at all. All the Republicans have, right? All the Republicans have is culture war baloney.